I'd like to read two very short poems from a series of individual pieces about particular artworks. And the first one is in response to Diego Velázquez's The Adoration of the Magi from 1619. I've got my eyes on you, Melchior, and though this be our shining time, I think I'll keep them there. Mother is too polite to say, but on balance we prefer shepherds, knowing as we do how things tend to turn out with guys like you, with your wisdom and your gold. And coming 300, almost exactly 300 years forward to 1920, and it's also relevant that that's exactly 100 years forward to our time. This is one young woman holding a cat by Gwen John. I am an unknown female sitter, arrested in my personal pandemic of loneliness. In 100 years from now, there will be 7 billion cats on computers, one for every soul on the planet. Mine will be forever black and twisting in my arms.
Thank you. They were wonderful. I love the sort of slight sense of humour that creeps in, but you're saying really serious things at the same time. I think that's brilliant. The first question is, when and how did you first know you were a writer?
I think about this quite a lot and continue to think about it. I suppose I divide it into two, Pippa. I think of when I liked the idea of being a writer, or when I first had that, and also when I actually felt I was preoccupied with it. And when I was in primary school, sorry, this isn't going to be as long an answer as that suggests. I was quite a sort of timid and quite interior person, child, and but I was, the first thing that I can remember being praised for was making nice, neat letters. I had the very old-fashioned ways of learning how to write, and then they started to say, well, you use words nicely, you know, this is a nice story. And because I was struggling with other things like tying my own shoelaces properly or even finding my way to school, even then I began to think, oh, so this is me, this is my kind of identity. No, I wouldn't have used that word obviously then. And as I grew older and got more confident, I just wrote a huge amount. When I was young, I was obsessed with cricket, and I used to write huge kind of endless reports on matches. And then I guess at school, you know, I loved poetry. I was good at English. I actually rather enjoyed studying at GCSE and A levels as well. I know some people think that it's a sort of dry experience, constantly focusing on you know, a limited number of texts, but that kind of taught me that there was a kind of rock of literature, you know, Shakespeare and John Donne, and so yeah, and then there was the period, I guess, when after university, starting to get used to sending magazines, getting used to the scene, if you like, and just being part of that community. And I guess so that, yeah, that's my early 20s. I think I was pretty well set on the path by then. Yeah. But it's always been for me about reading. Even going back to that very early time. And again, this is partly to do with being interior. I think I was a huge reader. I wouldn't say I was a particularly wide reader, but I was I would consume things once I got to like something. So yeah, it was reading really.
What sort of things did you read?
Well, again, it was, I used to raid second-hand shops by the age of 11 and buy up all these old cricket books from the 1950s. And there were some very good writers. And I think that taught me, I absorbed how to write sentences, I think, through that. I read an awful lot of children's literature as well. Some things I remember that aren't very fashionable now. Read a lot of Enid Blyton. There was a particular a series of books by Noel Streatfeild that I read a lot. My father used to read poetry to me when he could. You know, all those Robert Louis Stevenson rhymes and those sort of a garden book of verse. And by the time I was in secondary school, I guess this was before a huge fashion for young adult literature, we were kind of consuming authors like Hardy, Thomas Hardy, and Dickens. And I just hoovered it all up, really. Hoovered it up.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. It kind of sets the scene, doesn't it, for the way you think about books and writing and reading for the rest of your life.
Yes, and when I was about 16, I began to fancy myself as a kind of, you know, sentimental, dreamy kind of adolescent. So Brian Patten was hugely important to me for about a year or so. And I still respect the fact that he continued to write in a notably kind of romantic style all the way, you know, for decades and decades, when possibly a lot of his readers have sort of set that aside. So I admire that kind of focus as well. But yeah, he was, you know, a lot of people say this, don't they? The Liverpool poets, at the same time as you're reading, you're being taught the greatness of writers like Wordsworth and Donne. You've got that other thing as well, and you're trying to think, well, where does it all fit? You know?
Yeah. And where do I fit into this sort of massive landscape, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, your pamphlet bedtime reading very clearly shows how much reading's inspired your writing.
Yes, I enjoyed. Yes, that was important to me, that pamphlet. I went back to books. You know, rereading is a big thing for me, and I think you read differently in middle age. You know, you go back to books, but also it's nice to be reminded of the initial sort of warmth and impact that, you know, writers like Tolstoy, who I read in my 20s and then came back to. Forgot all the plots, of course.
Well, that helps when you're rereading, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But,
yeah, I did some. Have you ever reread something and been really disappointed?
Oh gosh, do you know, I don't. That's a good one. The last thing I reread was George Orwell's 1984, and I was astonished by its grimness and its power. So I wouldn't say I was disappointed, but I saw things in it that I think people forget, because it's obviously a hugely political novel, and yet there are some beautifully lyrical passages, which is something that we don't always associate with Orwell as a writer. And some, I've written a poem recently about his wife, who is mentioned very briefly and dismissively in the book, but there's a moment of huge tenderness, not expressed by Winston, but the absence of the female voice there is something that I was interested in. So I kind of, sometimes I do that. I make poems from little sort of understated themes in novels as well, which I think, I wish that had been brought to the surface more. So. But yes, disappointed on rereading. I I don't. Maybe I have an instinct for knowing that I'd be disappointed. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading The Glass Bead Game when I was about 20 and thinking, oh, that's amazing. And going back to it 20 years later and just not getting it at all.
Well, that's very interesting to me because I read it when I was about 20. That was one of the authors that I consumed. Yes, you reminded me about Hermann Hesse. And now you sort of warned me off reading it again because they say, don't they, that he's a young person's writer. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know what to do now, Pippa. You've confused me.
I'm sorry.
Did I read it or not?
read his short stories. They're still amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of brings me on to what you're writing at the moment.
Well, I'm engaged with the sequence that started this interview with. I've written up to now about 30 of these short poems on pieces of art. I have the way they came about was I started to think a few years ago about the discipline of writing a series or a sequence because I'm quite a slow writer, and I thought I'll set myself on the task. And then the first one I did was to write about trees and jogging, the sort of two themes I tried to put together. Set myself the very onerous task of writing one poem per month on that theme. But with the art poems, I wrote a poem about about Giotto about 18 months ago, and it just happened to turn out to be 9 lines long, and really quite casually I then wrote a poem about Mark Rothko. Actually, I've got those two the wrong way around. Rothko came first. And really, just for a little kind of exercise, I decided, oh, well, what would it be like to push the second poem into the same structure, same length as the other one? Not for any kind of compelling artistic reason, but just for a notebook exercise, the kind of thing. And I enjoyed and I immediately wanted to repeat this. So I have these poems that are all the same length in terms of lines. They have the same structure, and it's I mean, I'm interested in forms, but I'm also kind of convinced that one can impose one's own form and work within that discipline. There's no good reason why they're 9 lines, but I've kind of created a reason, and it's created a sort of momentum for me in writing, because I think, oh, okay, now I'm the kind of writer who will, if I'm affected emotionally by a piece of art, I think, oh, well, I'll write about that, and it'll be 9 lines. Of course, the danger of that is that it can become a bit schematic. You can go looking for it. Yeah. So I'm aware of that kind of possible tension. But I've really, and apart from anything else, it's enabled me to look properly at pictures. How people go into, I'm not saying anything unusual here. People will go into a gallery and they will walk past and not spend too much time in front of one. If I'm writing a poem about one, then I have to. So I get to know the art as well. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, and also writing a few poems. I have written a few poems that are very much affected by the kind of situation we've been in with the pandemic. So they've come to me a little bit as well recently, but they're individual pieces.
Yeah, so writing to constraints actually, for me, makes it more interesting. I don't know if that's the same for you. It's kind of more like a puzzle, how to fit what you want to say into the structure that you've selected.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a great thing to do, because you're tempted, aren't you, always to break out of that cage. And you might make a decision to do that, but you know that you perhaps shouldn't. And so it puts pressure on the words. And so yes, I agree with you absolutely. And I'm keen to say to my students, you know, you don't have to come into my class and write a sonnet now, but think about writing something in 70 words, or think about using 7 lines. You know, what can you say? What can you, how can you do it? So I agree with you absolutely. The discipline of the cage, if you like. Yeah.
I like that, writing of caged poet. That's a title for an anthology, isn't it, or a collection? Okay, so you've kind of hinted at this a bit, but how has COVID-19 and lockdown affected your writing life and the way you sort of engage with the writing community?
For me, it's been, I can't say I've been hindered by the situation. I think it goes back a little bit to my sense of interiority and aloneness with poetry. I'm not saying that lockdown and the huge sort of distress that it brings people have created conditions that I like, but I can it doesn't interfere with my process, in that I think sometimes I will spend a long time in my own head with a poem, and there's nothing about the last 9 months that prevent me from doing that. I'm in the fortunate position of working part-time, so I've not been overwhelmed with work at home. I'm not in that situation. And my work is, you know, I work in the universities, so it's not, no, it dovetails quite nicely with my creative process. And for some reason, I haven't thought it through particularly, I've had a good year writing. Yeah, I mean, at least I hope I have. I think it's been quite a fluent year for me. And I found subjects, I found themes. You know, like a lot of people, I've taken kind of quite a lot of interest in wildflowers recently, and in the earlier part of lockdown. And I was thinking one day about them and trying to identify them, because I have a quite nerdy kind of outlook to things like that. And I was thinking about the kind of empty corridors in the workplace as well. And then I thought, well, perhaps it's the same poem. So that was an example whereby the conditions we're in, if we hadn't been in the situation we're in, I probably wouldn't have written that poem. So yeah, that's how it's been okay. I mean, that. So yeah, I think that's been not a hindrance to me. Not a hindrance to me. I mean, other things, obviously, I've been frustrated by not being able to take part in certain physical activities. I get a lot of pleasure out of playing sport and stuff, but poetically, it's been quite an even keel for me. Yeah.
And I guess in some ways, the whole sort of difference of the situation and throwing things out of kilter, everything out of kilter the way it has, is kind of inspiring as well. Sounds like you found that.
Yes, it has. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. I think I was struggling to find those words, but I think you're right. And I think also because I've been engaged on this sequence, this series, there's nothing to stop me looking at a picture, for instance, and thinking about that picture. So, so yeah, I've been very interested to hear writers talking about how lockdown has been for them. And I guess this is the first time I've expressed that sense for me, that it's absolutely, it's been okay in that regard. Yeah.
Good. You talked a bit earlier about making suggestions to your students. So, I mean, you clearly help them. I know some of your students, and I mean, I've been one of your students, so I know how good a teacher you are. But does it work the other way around? Do you find teaching helps with your writing?
Yes, it does. I've never been one to think that teaching is a hindrance to creativity. In very practical terms, it's provided actually settings and occasions for poems for me. I have, written about things that have happened in classrooms. Not anything libelous or on, but no names are withdrawn, of course, and they're positive pieces, I hope. But no, because I would say that the times when you're not actually engaged with a heavy teaching load are the times when you might actually get the words down on the page, the time. But the actual inspirations and ideas, I would say teaching and my students are a fillip for me. Yeah, they provide. I mean, they're not there to provide inspiration for me, I know, but I've had some nice experiences, and so it's good. It's good. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear it, because it needs to work both ways, really, doesn't it, to be a sensible relationship. Okay, so apart from your students, who inspires you? So this can be writers or anyone particularly inspire you?
I get a lot of inspiration or help from reading good prose, actually. I mean, I obviously do read poets, but I'm a big consumer of fiction and books about ideas and philosophy. In fact, I probably spend more time reading prose than poetry, and I'm still working out of my mind why that is, and if I should try and alter that equation, so to speak. But I'm interested in when people use the phrase chopped up prose when they're talking about certain, it's a kind of reactionary response to what people might see as poetry that's free form or isn't. And I've always thought, well, I spend my sort of days thinking in what is chopped up prose. That's an interior monologue for me. And I think of poetry as finessing that prose somehow into the rhythms of poetry. So I will read someone like Scott Fitzgerald and find him an inspiration from my poetry because of the sheer beauty of the prose. Poets, I'm inspired more by their ideas and their lives, really, and their aesthetic approach. I'm devoted to Elizabeth Bishop and W.H. Auden, who I admire for just being ridiculously gifted. And it's meant different things to me at different times, Pippa. I mean, as I said to you earlier, I was crazy for the Liverpool poets when I was young. And then when I got into my sort of late 20s and 30s, I didn't really know what kind of writer I wanted to be. And I was pulled by very different kind of writers. I used to be very fond of the Irish poet Paul Durcan, who's very political, very lyrical, hyper romantic, sometimes quite surreal. And then on the other hand, I was thinking Charles Tomlinson's the man, very august, very classical almost. So these two, and they couldn't think of two more opposing kind of aesthetics, really. But I took stuff from both of those, and different poets to do. I mean, I admire poets like Edward Thomas, Norman MacCaig, so many different writers at different times, but I'm always aware of a sort of a tension in my writing between different aesthetics. And I find that when I talk to groups who cohere around certain ideas about what poetry should be, I always feel reluctant to kind of take sides, really, because I'm aware of the different pulls inside of myself as a writer. And I'm not particularly keen on the idea that I don't like using words like accessible or poetry that's particularly politically committed, or is striving for popularity too much. But on the other hand, I don't like the kind of high-mindedness which demeans the mainstream. There's some fairly sort of hostile and toxic little groups that cohere around. I think it's telling that the last three poet laureates, Simon Armitage, Caroline Duffy, Andrew Motion, all poets that I admire. And yet, if they publish perhaps an underpowered poem in a newspaper, you get that kind of that sort of hostile reaction, from people saying, "Oh, this is rubbish." My mate who's got a pamphlet out with, I don't know, Origami Glendower Press or something is better. So I went off a bit there, but yeah, I because I'm aware of the temptations of the mainstream. I think there's a lot of good poets in it. What is known as such, and so I tend to try and resist being too partial, I think.
Is that why your poems take so long to write, do you think?
Because I don't know what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah. They do take a long time to write. Ross Bradshaw's has a humorous reaction to this. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. I try to be very careful about lines. I think that's what it comes down to in the end. I try to be. I like Elizabeth Bishop's idea of accuracy. I try to be very truthful to what I'm trying to say. And it's a struggle.
Yeah, I relate to that as well. So what are you most proud of in your writing career?
I don't know. Proud is a funny word. I sometimes feel extremely happy or chuffed when someone I admire or respect says something good about a poem I've written, whether that be some kind of recognition by some kind of contest or something. I know that can be controversial as well in some quarters, but I'm very pleased with some of the poems I've written that are in my books. I struggle with this one. I'm quite proud of Ross Bradshaw introducing me at my last launch and saying that if poetry was the new rock and roll, I was still playing skiffle. He's quite good at the amiable insult, and I'm quite happy to wear that one. So I sort of avoided your question a bit there, Pippa, but I hope to be proud of what not when I finish, but just the process really, and I'm pleased that I've just kept on really. That's all.
Yeah. So the work itself is what makes you happy.
Yeah. Happy is a better word than proud, I think, for me. Yeah. I'm not cool about it. If I get told that I've done something that people have liked, I really like it.
Oh yeah.
So, any students are watching.
This is how to get your marks up, chaps. what do you hope to achieve in the future? Have you got any great ambitions, or is it more sort of doing what you're doing now?
Yes, doing what I'm doing now. I'd quite, yeah, I would like to be able to collections of poems are nice things to have out. I'm careful about this because it all sounds like you're putting yourself on the shelf, but I would quite like to finish up and collect the poems that I'm pleased with, put them in one place, and for people to say that's a decent book. That's really what I hope. So yeah, because I'm a little bit of a control freak. I do regret, and it's futile, but I will look back at books and think, oh, I wish I hadn't included that poem, or I wish I could rewrite that. And it is futile to think that, but I'm aware that there's that in me that wants to rewrite things and put them together again, maybe. So yeah, a nice sort of selected or collected works that is an okay piece of work would be what I'm going for, really.
Selected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I shall have words with the boss. I was going to say something there. I've completely forgotten what it was. Never mind. Okay, so that has absolutely been fascinating. I'm really, really interested in just about everything you've got to say, and I've got about 17 different comments that I've filed away in the back of my head to ask you next time I see you. But we're kind of running short of time now. So thank you ever so much for talking to us. And do you have a short poem to read us out with?
Yes, I'll read a poem that has the extremely exciting title of What Was Left in B212. And the reason why I'm writing this, I thought I'd read this one, is because I wrote it in about 12 months ago, so just at the end of the term last year. And it's taken on a little bit more of a significance consequently with the pandemic, because one of the things I quite enjoyed doing when I finished a class is sort of tut-tutting about what students have left on their seats. I kind of enjoy being a bit annoyed. It's like a sort of, and I tidy things up. I take them out and I say, I must tell them not to do this next time. Whereas, of course, now, even though I am doing some face-to-face teaching, everyone is very, it would be the ultimate sin to bring food in or to leave stuff. You're not allowed to. And the other day, I walked out of the class and thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have some kind of bit of litter to pick up, or a chewed up pen that doesn't work, and to sort of get myself a little bit sort of annoyed about it. But this is what I wrote. I wrote this poem, as I say, in December last year, and it's called What Was Left in B212. A horseshoe arrangement, air conditioning on, 4 scrawled up points, the assignments based upon. A display screen humming, blue and warm, a half-drunk coffee and a pasty wrapper torn. On a scrap of Joyce, a doodle has been drawn, a long and cursive line taken for a yawn. And sat alone at last, all his rhetoric done, the teacher lifts his mood by scribbling this for fun. Thank you.